Hey, welcome back to Shadow Shorts. If we've never met before, my name is Jeff Echols. I am a senior advisor and the head of marketing for Shadow Partners. And every weekday, I bring to you an expert or a thought leader in the field of innovation for the built environment. Today is no different. I am joined today by Robert Cooper. He's a founder and the CEO of Embue. And one of the things that I find in all of these conversations about built environment, one very important topic about innovation in the built environment is this idea of decarbonization. And I know Robert has not only has some strong views on that, but has actually built a company around that. So, Robert, first of all, welcome. Thanks for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me. Shadow Partners, Shadow Ventures, really good organization on so many different facets, and I'm really excited to be on Shadow Shores.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the plug. That's fantastic. Now, I mentioned decarbonization, and it comes up all of the time. We're gonna later this year we'll have Shadow Summit in October. I'll talk about that later. Decarbonization is going to be part of the conversation at that summit. Um, with all of this conversation going on, what are your opinions? What are your thoughts? What's your focus around decarbonization in the built environment?
Yeah, I think for those of us that have been aware of the climate change issue for some time, it's really been amazing over the last 2-3 years to see the real estate industry really latch onto their role in the problem, but really their role in the solution. And I've always had the thesis that because the climate problem and the decarbonization problem is so ubiquitous and touches every part of the economy, that really the only way to be successful around decarbonization is actually not to focus on it 100%. So, just to explain that a little bit more, there are companies out there that are pure play. They're doing something better about wind turbines or solar panels. Great. But 90% of the work we have to do is, in our case, in the built environment. It could be in transportation, it could be in something else. And in that environment, if you come out with a product and a solution and an approach that is really just a pure play in terms of carbon reduction, you're going to do great with maybe 20% of that market. But you know what? To get to 100% of the market, and that's really what the problem is with climate change, you need to fix everything. You really need a product that, number one, is just the best product of its kind in that space. And in our case, in multifamily, the best product typically in multifamily is something that improves the bottom line, either by reducing operating expenses or increasing revenue. So that's really been our focus all along. So when you look at our product and what it does in buildings, in terms of reducing energy consumption and being able to take advantage of the smart grid, which I'll maybe talk about in a little bit, that's all super important. But what really matters for our customers, and the reason they're going to buy the product, is because it's actually going to make a difference to the bottom line. And that's not unique to us. I mean, the sea change that happened in the EV space is because Tesla came out with an absolutely fantastic vehicle that just happened to be electric. And that theme really is sort of our mantra, and we've applied it in our space, but I think it's something everybody needs to kind of think about.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned a minute ago smart grid. So why don't we go ahead and define smart grid for anybody that's not isn't familiar or doesn't understand the term?
Yeah. Um, yeah, the smart grid is really in contrast to the grid we have today, which is kind of the dumb grid. I was actually on a call on a webinar yesterday, listening to a webinar where they were just reminding people how manual the grid is. A lot of things are done through phone calls and emails. And so what will happen is when we're thinking of one of these, super hot days, or maybe, a reduction in the electricity transmission because they're shutting down power lines because of the risk of wildfires, for instance. A lot of that work is done manually. And so the smart grid is really about automating all of that and making it easier to make those kinds of dynamic changes and make the grid much more automatic. And where that plays for energy consumers, whether they're individuals or whether they're enterprises, is that their interaction with the grid and how they get electricity is going to switch from this monthly arrangement where you get a bill, you don't really know what's going on, to really a lot of stuff happening in real time. And what will also happen in real time is pricing and payments. So in the past, and you look at your energy bill, most of that energy bill is about how much energy you use, the kilowatt hours, the actual amount of energy you use. And some of that bill is also about the peak energy that you might have used during that month. So there's a thing called the peak demand charge on a typical commercial bill. Whatever 15-minute period you use the most energy on, that's what you'll get dinged on. But of course, you don't find out about that until the end of the month. It's like, wow, how does that help me? So making that all real time, both in terms of the data and in terms of the pricing, is what's really going to change what we do. And in the case of buildings, you're going to be able to react to the needs of the grid in real time. And you have the ability to do that. You have the ability to shift load. You have the ability to, turn down or slow down pumps in the building, maybe turn off an elevator, maybe make some adjustments to folks' thermostats. And it's great because the customers, our customers, the real estate owners, are going to actually get paid by the grid to move that energy consumption around. And in fact, at certain times, you will actually get paid to use energy, which is kind of an interesting concept. So interacting in that way with the smart grid, people are working on that. On our side, in our case, the multifamily operators side of using that energy, making those kinds of changes we talked about has to be done in a way that doesn't impact people's comfort, and of course certainly doesn't impact people's safety. So by making the building smarter through the kind of technology that we have, and connecting it to the smart grid, and automating that so it's no longer phone calls and emails, that's really the future that we're kind of getting to. And I think one misconception that people have is they just don't realize how manual things are today. They kind of think the grid maybe kind of works a little bit like the internet. It will, but it's not quite there yet.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, we've got this legacy grid. Of course, it's just going to just has to be that way. That's where it comes from. But there's this transition, and it makes me think. I'm looking at the buildings in the background behind you, and we're talking about this. I've spent a lot of time with people that are focused on historic preservation, and they will always make the argument that the most sustainable building is one that already exists. Right? We're not dumping. Well, theoretically, we're not dumping carbon footprint into that building. And so I know in the multifamily world, obviously there's new construction, there's renovation, et cetera. So when you're thinking about decarbonization, is there a difference, or what's the difference when you're considering existing versus new construction?
That is a really, really good point that you brought up. And I got to say, until a few years ago, I actually didn't believe that statement that the greenest building is the one that already exists, because these buildings are pretty old and pretty horrible in many ways. And it seemed like, well, isn't it easier just to tear the thing down and put a new one up? But there's been a lot of research done in the last couple of years that's got out there about embodied carbon. So if you tear a building down, you put up a brand new one, you sort of set off a carbon bomb for the concrete that you just cured and the steel you just made and all this kind of stuff. So you don't want to blow up the old buildings. You want to be able to use them. But then those buildings are really energy hogs, and they're very uncomfortable for people as well. So how can you cost effectively upgrade those buildings? So all of these buildings need to be on a decarbonization pathway. So decarbonization is a capital project. There's some simple things you can do now that I'll get into in a minute, but at some point you're going to have a capital project to upgrade that building. New windows, better insulation, new mechanical systems. And so you're going to put that into the capital cycle planning process. And it looks daunting. There's a lot of numbers out there that have said things like, $50,000 an apartment to do that kind of renovation. There's some fairly recent research out of the Rocky Mountain Institute and out of the Department of Energy that actually says that's true for maybe about 20% of the buildings in the country. And the really good news is that the other 80% need to electrify. They need to replace, fossil fuel systems with electric systems. But the building envelope work, the new windows, the insulation, and so forth, is much more modest in most of the country and with most buildings. That is really, really good news, because now the cost of that decarbonization is now in the same zone as the cost of a typical repositioning or rehab of a building. And that's really, really good news. What you will need in that building, whether it's having the deep energy retrofit, the very expensive one I mentioned, or these lighter retrofits, is that building's going to need to talk to the smart grid and respond to the fact that there's more renewables on the smart grid and that there's congestion in the grid because there isn't enough transmission. There isn't even enough distribution, which is referring to the wires and cables that is coming down the street. There's not enough of that electricity today if people electrify. So that decarbonization pathway has to include a smart building system that's going to allow you to manage that load and keep it within the limits that are currently imposed by the state of our grid and our distribution. 10, 15, 20 years from now, that problem will be solved, but we need to decarbonize sooner than that. So there's some good news in there, and then there's some solutions that are going to allow people to really, achieve most of the decarbonization goals that we need.
Yeah, yeah. Now, in the last few minutes that we have, we've kind of danced around and hinted at what you do, what embue is. Can you give us in a nutshell what it is that you're working on and how it's implemented in the multifamily market?
Yeah, it's very simple. So most multifamily buildings, the vast majority of them, have very little technology in them today. So we go into those buildings, or at least our partners, our installers, go into those buildings and install Internet of Things devices, including smart thermostats, sensors, other kinds of controllers, literally in every space in that building, and including talking to any central HVAC equipment in that building. We then wrap that with a software platform. Some of that platform is running inside the building because we're doing control, and those control algorithms need to be inside the building and not dependent on the internet being up or down. And then we have the bulk of our software, where our AI and our analytics are running out in the cloud, and then serving up a user interface to the staff in the building. The staff might be in another building; they can manage it remotely, and the headquarters staff. So that's really what we do. And so obviously a lot of that relates to the smart grid I was talking about and the energy savings, but it also relates equally to staff productivity. And in fact, that's the reason the staff in the building love using the product. Yeah, they probably care about climate change, but they care more about residents complaining at them and the amount of work they have to do and the amount of driving or walking around that they have to do. And at the same time, they're also getting a handle on problems like frozen pipes, high humidity that can cause mold, all the kinds of headaches that are just day-to-day what you have to deal with in multifamily. And that gets back to sort of the first point I made, that we really work on making the product, the best product it can be for this task. And it just happens to also, help us solve the climate change problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I mean, there seems to be this recurring theme that's coming out in Shadow Shorts now. That's, hey, we've got all these tools, we've got all this innovation, but they're tools for people, right? And they have an impact on people. And there's a little bit of an unexpected twist there. The staff loves it because of all of these things, all the ways that it impacts their work, and I'm sure
you're absolutely right. We talk a lot about technology, we talk a lot about buildings, but it's really all about people.
It is. It really is. Hey, if you want to know more about what Robert and his team are working on, go to embue.com. Right now, the URL is in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. I'm sure that Robert would be okay with you reaching out to him on LinkedIn as well if you want to connect with him there. But embue.com is the organizational website. You can check out everything that's going on in-house over there. And if you're watching this right now, either live or in some time shifted version, and you say, hey, this is super interesting. I want to know more. I want to have a deeper conversation about this, then Shadow Summit is probably what you need to get involved with, because that is where we take conversations like this. This is 10 or 15 minutes long. They're shadow shorts. Well, at Shadow Summit, we get into the weeds in conversations about decarbonization and conversations about generative AI, about the financial outlook of the real estate market, et cetera. This year, Shadow Summit 2023 will be our seventh annual Shadow Summit. It'll be in Atlanta, Georgia, October 24th through 26th. Shadowsummit.com. The URL is in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen right now. This is a highly curated in terms of topics and audience, and intentionally cozy, I would say, intimate. No more than 200 tickets for this event. So it's limited. There is a button right there at the top of the website at shadowsummit.com for you to apply for a ticket. And they're going fast. So check that out. Go to shadowsummit.com to click that button. And if you're interested in sponsoring Shadow Summit, like the National Institute for Building Sciences has, and Schneider Electric have, and others, then reach out to me here on LinkedIn or anywhere that you find me on the internet. And I'm happy to help you plug in a way that makes sense for you as a sponsor for Shadow Summit, because as always with these types of conferences, we can't do it without our sponsors. But exposure to conversations like this, companies like Robert's, startups, investors, corporate partners, everybody in the built environment, everybody focused on the built environment. That's what happens at Shadow Summit. So check that out. Now, today's Friday as we broadcast this, so we're going to take the weekend off, but I'll be back Monday with another Shadow Short. So join me at noon Eastern on Monday for another one of these. And Robert, thanks not only for joining me, but thanks for the work that you're doing. It's important work, and I love the fact that we're focused not only on decarbonization, not only on climate, but also the people. So thanks for this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeff. It's been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to have you here. And for all of you out there, have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday.